I know we're taught how to be butchers, but ultimately, we're expected to be a bit more than a butcher today. We're almost, a hybrid butcher, chef, a farmer, the whole lot. So we got to piece all that together and get the messaging right.
This is the Australian Butchers Guild podcast, brought to you by Meat and Livestock Australia, the podcast for passionate butchers.
Yeah, g'day and welcome to the Australian Butchers Guild podcast. I'm your host, Doug Piper. Hope everyone's enjoying the podcast as we get through them all. Been talking to some really interesting fellas around the place about butchery and how they run their business, and today I'm catching up with a fella called Rafael Ramirez from Western Australia. I've known Rafa for probably since 2007. I think I first met Raf, and we've kept in contact all these years. And Rafa's sort of one of these guys that is very good at what he does. He's a great butcher. He knows a lot about meat in general, and he's gone off on a different phase of his career, and he's gone into some consultancy work, as well as he still keeps the knife strapped to his belt. G'day, Rafa.
How are you, Doug?
Great to see you. Great to have you on board. What have you been up to?
Yeah, Dougie, I asked myself that quite a lot, to be honest, but lucky enough to be keeping busy, working with, retailers, food service guys, and I suppose industry in general. So that's keeping me busy as part of the consultancy business that you mentioned, and lucky enough to sort of keep a handle in that space.
Yeah, awesome, mate. So how did the consultancy business come about?
Bit of necessity, I suppose, Doug. I suppose one is I sort of got to a stage in my career where working with industry body group, and that sort of went in a different direction. I suppose the opportunity where I sort of saw in this consultancy service there was a clear gap around technical support, and I was sort of regularly getting called back into by industry to sort of, whether it was presenting or doing workshops or providing marketing support or just business development support around that area. And that sort of led me to believe that I thought there was an opportunity around developing some consultancy around that. And that was, 2014, 15 at the end of that sort of time frame, and, close to 10 years down the track. It's been keeping me busy ever since.
Who are your customers, mate? You're dealing with a lot of different people, both domestically and internationally. So how do they find you, I suppose, and who are they?
So I'll probably start off with probably three key focuses, what the business is sort of focuses on. And really that was, technical support, that marketing and business development. And that sort of led into spaces around industry body groups like MLA and the marketing teams and international markets around how do we promote Australian beef and lamb. And there was a real shortage around how we could do that. And I was lucky enough to follow behind a very fellow friend of mine, Barry Lloyd, that was doing a lot of work in those international markets, and got a little bit of a chance to spend some time with him. He was actually my TAFE teacher back in the day. He sort of gave me a bit of direction that there was some clear opportunities in that space, and I thought that was a really interesting place for me to step out and learn a bit more about international markets, and spent probably the next 5 or 6 years in that space delivering workshops and training and a bit more business development work with some key clients in there. So that led me into, I suppose, working with a bit more with retail butchers in international markets and supply chains, and food service chefs in hotels and things like that. So it got me, across the board, right through retail, food service, distribution, international markets, and leading back into producers. So I've, right across the supply chain, I have different clients wanting different sort of, or having different pain points, and then really trying to find some solutions for them.
So their main issues would be, I suppose, butchery to start with, like lack of skill, not knowing how to cut meat, to be honest, how does it all come about? And the other side of it is product knowledge too, knowing all those other cuts and when you cut the cook methods and everything.
Yeah, 100%. So when you get into international markets, it's a little bit different to like the domestic market where we're trained to be butchers, right? So a lot of these guys are just given knives and have some reasonable knife skills, but don't really know a whole lot about carcass utilization and cut by cook methods and extracting further value. So that's, a really interesting phase that you start with some of the basics and fundamentals with those types of guys. And as you get into more sophisticated markets, even just like the domestic market, the skill set, even when you get into whether it's butchers or chefs, is really understanding that cut by cook methodology and extracting further value. So I know we're taught how to be butchers, but ultimately, we're expected to be a bit more than a butcher today. We're almost, a hybrid butcher, chef, a farmer, the whole lot. So we got to piece all that together and get the messaging right.
Where do you think you got most of your skills from? What did you use as a resource?
Yeah, look, it probably stems back from, starting off as an apprentice butcher and being hungry enough to want to learn a bit more than just cutting meat. I sort of had a bit of methodology as I grew up a little bit more and started to chase. If I didn't know something, I needed to learn how to find it. So I started to invest, as I got out of owning my own shop and moving in the industry, is trying to invest in myself in regards to, if I didn't know something, learn it. Lucky enough to work in some good commercial businesses from management and those types of things, are really understanding what commercial performance was. And that commercial performance really dictates everything that we do in butchery. So I've got a saying, a good butcher makes you money and a bad one costs you money. So just cutting meat, there's a little bit more to butchery than just that. We've got to be a bit more polished in regards to all those skill sets.
The trade's changed so much from the days when we both started, I suppose. And today, as you mentioned earlier, the whole cooking thing is just so crucial to butchers. But knowing where to find this information, and getting off your backside and actually finding it out for yourself, whether it be using the internet or asking somebody that you know, it's just so important to do that, to keep ahead of the times and making sure that you're keeping update with what the customers want.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. And I suppose I've been lucky enough. Look, I started my apprenticeship working in one of the major supermarkets for 10 years, where there was a bit of structure and understanding, volume and cutting meat. And then as I've transitioned out of that and got into butchery, it was about, yield and commercial performance. And, the biggest learning I had as a young 24-year-old wanting to get into the butcher world, own his own butcher shop, was understanding just simple things like gross profits and margins, right? I reckon that cost me about 30 grand trying to work that out, right? And when I did, I'll never make that mistake again. So yeah, just being in those different environments and experiencing those pain points or making money or losing money has really taught me some valuable lessons in that. So yeah, pretty exciting.
So you started out after school, like most other butchers that we've had on here, left school at 15 or couldn't wait to get out of school?
Yeah, Doug, absolutely. So I remember having this conversation with Dad when I finished year 10, 15, and he goes, if you don't have an apprenticeship by the time school holidays comes back, you're going back to school. And while I loved hanging out with my mates and stuff like that, it wasn't something, I just wasn't in that phase. I just wasn't an academic, right? I needed to do things with my hands. So I fell into butchery. I don't have a love story like a lot of other butchers do, where their grandparents and fathers and all that were butchers. I fell into butchery, but I soon learned how to really love what I do. I'm really passionate that it's a craft and a skill set that's people today, when I have conversations and ask what I do and say I'm a butchery and do consultancy, is they get fascinated by butchery. I don't know, that there's something about it that people really find, comforting, and they find it, it's really interesting. So once upon a time, I used to say I was just a butcher. Now I'm pretty passionate and say, yeah, I'm a butcher. I love what I do.
I get annoyed when people say, I'm just a butcher, because you're not. And everything you hit on then, like the craft, the whole industry itself, it's something that not just anybody can pick up a knife and do. We've got a skill set. We know how to use it properly. You can get a piece of meat and you can create a meal from it. And then you can give somebody the right cooking instructions. Chefs can't do that. Not many people can do that, but a butcher has that skill, that knowledge. And yeah, you're not just a butcher. You are a butcher. And I had the same conversation. We've had the same conversation before when you're talking to people and they ask what you do, but they love it. We take it for granted because we know what we're doing, but people just look and watch or listen to what you do. We underestimate the trade.
Yeah, look, there's plenty of meatheads or meat nerds out there.
Yeah.
Right, when you get into a conversation, and it's my wife sometimes look at me when I start talking meat, because I just love talking it, right, and people love talking about it. But Doug, you mentioned something really, really important there, that as butchers, yeah, we cut meat, but ultimately we think further down the chain of where we end up. It's really what it's meal solutions, right? It's all about understanding what a consumer wants and what they're doing. This big fresh category of making sure we got beautiful meat, whether it's grass fed, grain fed, all those types of attributes. Wagyu, giving someone an excuse to be exciting and home cook and all those sorts of stuff is, I think we're in a really exciting phase, and People are really, really wanting to know where food comes from. And as butchers, that gives us a perfect platform to tell our story.
The whole meal solution thing has just gone next level. You've got people out there doing, a lot of butchers out there doing a raw value add product. And now we're looking at ready to eat and ready to cook sort of stuff. Have you seen a lot of that in your travels around the place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we think about our offering, it needs to be those three things. There's a component of customers that want beautiful fresh produce in its rawest state, and we need to be able to provide that. Then we've got an element of I suppose customers that are a bit time poor, and why they like to be a bit adventurous. They like a bit of a hand from the butcher to create these wonderful ready to cook type ranges for us, where I get home, pop it in the oven or whatever it is, in 20 minutes I'm having a meal that I could have at a restaurant sort of thing. So that next level, better than what I can do. And this ready to cook range, it doesn't matter what meat cabinet you're looking at these days, that is really starting to take more cabinet space in regards to, I want to cook that brisket, but I don't have 12 hours to cook that overnight. Can I have something that's done and I just regen? And that's happening at retail and food service. It's about this twice cook phenomenon. How do I just take it, reheat it, or regen, which they call in food service, and put a dish that's taken 12 hours to do, or something along those lines, put that in front of someone with this, this amazing experience, right? So food's emotional. You get it right, people just absolutely love it. You want to upset someone, you get it wrong, and you disappoint them.
The whole emotional side of food, it's a good use of that word, because people live for food. People love eating food. They'll go to a restaurant, they'll have a really good experience eating food, and then they want to go home and replicate it. So then they go to the butcher. There's no point going to a supermarket, because 9 times out of 10, there's nobody there to talk to. So they've got to go to a butcher, and they talk to the butcher and ask for that. And that's where the butcher stands up, having that knowledge, being able to say, here, sure, we've got this steak that you're after or whatever it is that you want, and this is how you should cook it, It's all this information which brings back that customer back to the butcher shop, because they then get that trust, that loyalty from that customer for the future. It's just so important to have all that knowledge.
Yeah, Doug, and I think you sort of nailed it. As butchers, that's our gap, right? That's where we provide that service. Nobody else can do that as good as we can do it. If we go back over trade, as we learn how to cut meat, we learn some really basic fundamentals around cooking, and then someone asks you to roast something that's 180, whatever. I think we need to get past that scenario and actually dive into a bit more, low and slow and all those types of things. So I as part of the consultancy work that I do is really trying to understand cooking methods of what's the end game someone's trying to do. And then we go back and marry the right cut for it. So, we get the right eating quality based on cut by cook methodology, as opposed to just going, hey, here's a cut of meat. That's just what I know. And ultimately that's where you end up. So people are much more adventurous in regards to, alternative cuts, I like to call them. Those cuts now are becoming trendy. We are starting to see things on menu. So food service stimulates excitement. You see a great chef, or you go to a meal somewhere and you go, that was awesome. And then you come and ask your butcher, hey, how do I get that? Can you help me with it? And that's where our butchers just need to be keeping on trend, get an understanding of what's happening in food service, cooking shows, all that sort of stuff, because that's what's going to come back. And they're the questions people are going to ask. And we need to be able to answer those questions passionately. And remember, we're providing food for our friends, family, and colleagues. It's a pretty important job that we've got.
If you think about way back to when you first started your apprenticeship, or you finished your apprenticeship, you're in a butcher shop, and you think about all the cuts of meat you get off a carcass, isn't it incredible how much more there is in the carcass now that we've been in the industry for a long time? We've been both very lucky to do and work in some amazing places and see what goes on. But there's just so much more of the carcass than just your main primals, and how they can be cooked up and eaten.
Absolutely, Doug. I mean, I suppose, out of primals, we don't have any more of them, right? We've just become a bit more exciting around how we sub-primal and how we extract value out of those cuts. And, sometimes you can have, one muscle on a primal that just doesn't grill, for an example, right? Where if you remove that muscle and you've got the other two muscles that will grill, or give you a better eating quality outcome. it's extracting further value, and it's, I've got a clear vision when it comes to the consumer, and it's about eliminating failure rate. So every time we have a failed experience for a customer, we give them an excuse to go somewhere else or donate that protein. So our job is really to understand, I suppose, the functionality of the muscles within the carcass, and then the functionality determines, potentially flavor and cooking profiles. And then as we get a really good understanding of those, we can then start to be exciting when it comes to butchering. So, and that chefs love it. They want to know what the next trend cut is. They want to know what the next lamb shank is, all that sort of stuff, right? So we're getting much more exciting. Tri-tips, 10 years ago, you'd go, what the hell is that, right? We get into these Asian markets, and, if we think about who is surrounded by that Asian influence, an example by stir frying and cutting, I suppose cutting something a centimetre thick and cutting it as stir fry versus cutting something 3 or 4 mils thick Cantonese style. What's the difference in eating quality of that outcome? And they're chalk and cheese, right? So understanding how different cultures have been cutting meat, preparing it, using it, gets a really good outcome. So, getting exposure to that type of thing is really important too.
What sort of a scope do you think there is for butchers to start doing a lot more, I suppose, Asian-style cuts? Do you think it's a great opportunity there for a lot of butchers?
Yeah, I think so. I think in time, and I've had discussion with a couple of different guys in different markets, I think there should be a packet of thin sliced in your freezer already, vacuum sealed, ready to go, so that if you want a quick meal, it can come out and, defrost really quickly and onto a stir fry really quickly, right? So I think it comes back to, I've done some work in these Asian markets, but instead of being name focused, we actually become cooking method focused. So we think about people, how they buy meat. They're getting excited by, the stir fry they saw on a cooking show, or the casserole they saw, or a slow cooked shoulder of lamb or something like that. So I think the scope around for butchery is actually selling meat by its cooking methods. Right? Don't get fixated on the names of meats. Is actually, set your cabinets up to go, here's your stir frying section, here's your roasting section, here's my grilling section, here's my casserole section. Make it easy for a customer, because if we think about the platform that they go and shop elsewhere, it's done like that, and it's done for a reason. It's because it's easy to shop like that. We shop by cooking methods, and I think that's something we've got to get across that makes it easy for the customer.
The whole sea of red, it's just so confusing for someone that has no idea what they're looking at, So having that direction there for a cook method, I think, is just so crucial. And we've seen that over the years in butcher shops with their labelling, with their ticketing that they put on there. They might have it in little writing down the bottom that I have to put my glasses on to read, but it should be top now. It should be right up the very top, because that's what people are looking for. I'm looking for a brazier. I'm looking for a griller or a stir fry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's really, really important. Like, I think we've got to keep that top in mind, and then we've got to keep in mind, portion sizings, how much do I need to feed a family, those types of things, and then get back to understanding whether it's unit pricing or value. This product feeds 4 people XYZ dollars, and get people thinking along those lines as opposed to thinking per kilo prices. Because I think, as meat gets more expensive, just straight up per kilo pricing is daunting. And I like the opportunities when we value add and going, hey, this feeds 4 people, it's a ready to go meal, off you go, and it's, I don't know, it's $5 a head, or, $8 a head. People don't care. They just want to know roughly, that'll feed my family, and that's probably cheaper than going to McDonald's, right?
A lot better for you too.
Absolutely.
You see a lot of butchers cross-merchandising these days. It's been going on for a while. A lot of butchers, they would have been in a shopping centre or a little strip shop centre with a produce, with a fruit and veggie shop there. And then eventually that fruit and veggie shop goes away because people aren't going there. So the butcher decides to bring in a few carrots, potatoes, a little small range of produce in his shop. They work in some cases, and I think it's a great idea, but think about hamburgers and things like that. You might have a bakery close by, use their bun. If you're going to go promote hamburgers for a week or whatever, and I'm sure there's butchers out there doing it, but I think it's great that they're doing it using locally made product like a burger bun. And then they've got the lettuce, they've got the carrot, they've got tomato there anyway. So you're creating, again, that meal solution for your customer. That's a one-stop shop. They come in, they buy the whole lot, they can go home and construct them at home, and they are 10 times better than what the alternative.
Yeah, something I've learned as part of consultancy is you're good at what you're good, right? But it's stuff that you're not good at, you bring people in. So if that's an example of, hey, are you going to make buns? Probably not, right? Who's someone doing a good job of it? Bring them in. That's a classic example of what does excellence look like, right? And bring those skill sets together. So, that's an example of just being open enough to pull skill set or pull produce around you to make a good offering. I think that's just common sense, right? Be good at what you know, be comfortable what you do, and then look for that opportunity to provide families. We need to be cost effective in regards to do that. So I think we've got this really good mix of people that come to butcher shops, and there's a bit of a stigmatism around, a good butcher shop. Sometimes I only see my customers, on special occasions, right? And that's because we're known for having really good quality. And then that secondary phase is how do you get that customer that's coming back weekly and providing value for money? And I think that's a challenge that we're in regards to stop getting fixated on selling something per kilo price, because I'll just judge you on price, provide a meal solution and solve an issue.
Hey, mate, on the value add side of it, who's doing it really well over in WA? We don't get over that side of the world very often. You're like another country over there.
Yeah.
But what's happening over there? Who's doing a really good job over there?
To be honest, Dougie, if we could cut the bit off in the middle there and WA was its own country, we'd be pretty happy, right? But
Of course you bloody would.
I've sort of broke it down into a few different sectors. But if you go to your standalone shops, we've got some really good, those independent retail butchers evaluating it. Like I just go, WA, we're pretty good, right? We offer a really good service, but I'll just throw a few names around. Mondo Butchers is someone that's always been a good value adder and offering a good, farm to fork story in regards to what they do. Barbaro Butchers, both of those butchers, you go out on a Saturday morning and they're cooking rolls and that, so one, it's, hey, this is what we do it really well. And two, while you're there, grab a roll and you just create a new shopper, right?
Yeah.
So, we've got, I'll throw a few more names. Scarfo's at Meats, Ryan's Quality Meats that do a really good farm to, they got a great story around supporting a producer, which is Sterling Rangers, and they use that brand really well. So that's a WA brand, butcher supporting a WA producer and putting that into retail and food service. So they're sort of standalone shops, Doug. I sort of go, those guys do it really well and offer just more than selling meat. And then I've done a bit more about that. You mentioned before that fresh market setup, right? Which is guys that are set up that have, all the fresh produce around them. And so I suppose it's a fresh market setup, right? And we've got an amazing one down in Bunbury, which is called Bunbury's Farmers Market. And they have this, one of the busiest in the state by far. And they have this ready to cook whole range going through there. So it's almost like an Aldi setup, an IKEA setup where you walk in and you can't get out, right? You got to walk in one way and walk out. Has all this beautiful produce around. But, Bunbury's Farmers Markets, the boat sheds, herdsman's, Torres and Modinis, Charlie's, those guys that have been around in those, they do it really well and they offer a good, it's a fresh category, right? So people, if you think about how they buy fresh, it's fruit and veg and meat, all right? That's a really good mix. And then we've also got a bit of, not so much in that, I suppose, value-adding model, it's more of that wholesale direct model, right? Where we've guys that have stepped out and you've got guys like the WA Big Butcher that's doing wholesale direct type of things, whole cuts of meats, and more about people stepping into that space. And Troy's Meats or Secret Butchers where they created a bit of a cult around that low and slow type phenomenon. But they're different segments and, that retail value-adding space sort of sit more in those standalone and fresh markets. But I think we're seeing more and more fresh ingredients being used, fresh approach to how we value add.
I remember years ago, when I first met you, actually, we were over in Perth at a butcher's tour over there. And the standout shops were Mondo's. I didn't get to Herdsman because I think I came a day late. But it was Mondo's and the Boat Shed. Have those guys changed much over the years? Like they were leading, they were well ahead of the pack way back then, nearly 20 years ago. So have they changed their formula much, or are they still relying on what they've created in the past?
I think the formula is still there, right? Like your Boat Shed is like it's probably been revamped, and same as Herdsman Fresh of those guys. Over time, they get a bit tight and they get revamped, and then that next level is dry aging cool rooms and, just whatever's hot at the time, good value adding, retail packaging done, ready to go. So they sort of embracing a bit more of what customers are looking for at the time. But I think WA's always been good at value adding. I think they've just continued on that pathway. And I would say that all of those guys would have, chefs working with them that step up a little bit more to that professional model. And I'm not saying that butchers, we don't do that great, but I think these guys tag on, a food service element to their business and provide that next level of ready to cook and ready to eat range.
Yeah, we see a bit of that in the eastern states too, where butchers have employed a chef. There's quite a number of them out there, and they're doing some fantastic work, and they work hand in hand, and it's a great way to utilising everything, absolutely everything, making stocks and even doing their own lard these days. Butchers on the east, in Sydney in particular, they've had to find a way to get rid of their own fat and bone now, so they're looking at ways how they can incorporate that into their business. And I bet you any money the GPs have gone up a lot because of maybe not in dollars, but in percentage, because they're utilising more of the carcass.
Yeah, and look, and that's still the name of the game, right? Is if we think about if you're in a carcass format, over 30% of the carcass is trim, right, bones, fat, all that sort of stuff. So, whole carcass value adding is become more of a mainstream thing. You can't afford to throw bones away. The fat, like you said, Doug, is if you can push that into drippings and things like that. Just talking about one of our butchers there, Ryan's, I know that they sort of step in and do a bit of processing, and they say they've just started creating a tub of lard or dripping that they can then sell to their customers and then sell into food service. So that, duck fat component where we cook chips in is actually extracting the value out of that and then providing that. So, good natural animal fats is now sort of seen to be a nasty word. It's actually seen as, good but naughty, but, that's how you can drive some real value add and flavour into some products, right?
Yeah, everything in moderation.
Yeah, exactly.
I might have spoken about it before, but I was in South Australia about a month ago, and I went down and saw the guys in Goodwood Meats there, and I was looking in the window, and he had a couple of little fridges, just upright fridges in the window. It doesn't have a window display, but you can see straight in the shop. Anyway, there's two fridges sitting there. And I looked at it, and what the hell's he putting cheesecake in the window for? Because he had these single slices of this cheesecake stuff sitting on the platters, one piece on a shelf, about 3 shelves high, and had a bit of, some sort of garnish over the top of that. Looked like could have been cinnamon or whatever you have with cheesecake. Now, I walked in and I've sort of I was talking to Dave and Lukey there, and next thing I brought it up and they said, that's dripping. So they make it look like, they obviously get the dripping, they make a cake out of it, and they cut it into portions and they put a sprinkle over it. And I thought, what a great idea. And I said, how do people eat it? And they said, well, they buy the slice like this. I don't know how much they get for it, but they get pretty good dollars for it. And people will use it in their cooking, whether they're doing potatoes or whether they're doing a steak or whatever, rather than using oil or butter or whatever, they use this instead. But it's utilising all that. But the way that they're marketing it, and it gave me an idea. So when I got home, I went down to the Coles supermarket down the road and I bought you can buy lard or dripping in a container in the fridge. So I melted it down and I made a couple of like brie-shaped sort of objects. Looked like hockey pucks, and I put some sprinkle on it. And I thought, that actually works. It actually works. I've actually got a post coming up in a couple of weeks of the stuff that I did. I got a bit of butcher's paper, I wrapped it up, made it look like brie, went on to AI, used Copilot, got a label made up with butcher's dripping or whatever. Anyway, it looks really cool. And I used some of it the other night when we were doing some potatoes in the smoker, and I had them in a foil tray, and I used some of that lard, that fat and that. I tell you what, it works well. Okay, I didn't make the dripping myself, but if the butcher's doing it, it's just a different way of marketing it. That's what it's all about. It's just creating that little bit of excitement. I know I'm getting old and a bit silly at times, but I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, like you said, value adding comes in lots of shapes and forms. I think if it's a natural product, they're keen to keep it natural, right? So I think that has a really good thing. But you made a really good point in regards to so butchering. There's so many elements to it, right? And you mentioned marketing, right? Marketing is such a unique way. And I sort of learned this when I first opened my butcher shop, right? I thought I was, fairly advanced in value adding and all those sorts of things, and felt like I was, really doing some good work. But if nobody knows about you, or nobody knows anything where you are or anything like that, then you just get lost in the system. So marketing, I'm not saying that you put an ad in the paper tomorrow, but, investing back into your business and being clever enough to market a bit alternative, things that are a bit left field these days. And if I can't get it from somewhere, where can I get it from? So, utilising dripping and those types of things. It's funny, we're almost going back to when we were cavemen, right? We were doing this stuff 100 years ago, right? And now as we need to extract further value to survive, ultimately, is extract further value across the supply chain or across the business, we need to be more adventurous, and it fills a gap in the marketplace where people are looking for it.
Well, if you enjoyed that chat with Rafa, well, you're going to enjoy part 2 in our next episode of the Australian Butchers Guild podcast.
This podcast is provided for information purposes only. The MLA Group strongly recommends that listeners exercise discretion and obtain professional advice before relying on any information in this podcast.